Zimbabwe will never be a colony again.
President Robert Mugabe, end of an era. Welcome to this current affairs program on a historic day in Zimbabwe. My name is Admire Mungu. Now, after a long protracted struggle, Zimbabwe gained independence on the 18th of April, 1980. Comrade R.G. Mugabe assumed the post of Prime Minister. In 1987, he assumed the office of President with the late comrades Joshua Nkomo and Simon Mzenda as deputies. Over the years, he has been known as a man who fought for the land that came with the struggle. Key among them is the land question, education and health for all, as well as the sovereignty of the country from outside influences. Here are some of his memorable quotations.
We cannot get the land for the people, then the people will get it. Without us, on their own, just seize it.
I still recall quite vividly the palpable collective resolve, dedication and commitment of our forebearers to unite and free our continent from the scourges of capitalism and poverty. Zimbabwe adopted its own economic blueprint, the Zimbabwe Agenda for Sustainable Socio-Economic Transformation, ZIM-ASSET. This is a bold and achievable development program that has the objective of achieving inclusive growth, generation of decent jobs for all, affordable and reliable energy, security, agriculture, and development of reliable modern infrastructure.
Yes, end of an era. Now, on the 13th of November, the Zimbabwe Defense Forces Commander General Constantine Chiwenga issued a press statement on the affairs of ZANU-PF and the implication on national development. Today, the Speaker of Parliament, Jacob Mdenda, that is Advocate Jacob Mdenda, read out the resignation of the President during a joint session of Parliament at the HICC. We are now joined in the studio by political analyst, Comrade Claude Mareza, who's here, as well as Advocate Thabani Mpofu. It's a historic day, Comrade Mareza, for Zimbabwe.
Exactly, really historic. I mean, nobody would have ever in their dreams thought that such a day would actually happen. Only 2 weeks ago, things started happening at a pace which we didn't think would come to this climax. Mm-hmm. A historic day indeed, very historic. Very historic. Now, Advocate Mpofu, Thabani Mpofu, His Excellency President Robert Mugabe handing in his resignation today. What does this mean for the country? And what happens? Most of the people out there who are watching this program are saying, what's going to happen tomorrow?
Thank you. What it means for Zimbabweans is that the sun is risen. There is going to be a new political dispensation. There's also going to be a new constitutional dispensation for the very first time in the history of our country. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to replace a president consequent upon a resignation. So what must now happen is that certain provisions of the constitution must now be activated. A replacement must now be put in place. And so that should happen tomorrow. There is no reason in law, there is no reason in logic why that shouldn't happen tomorrow. So by the end of the day tomorrow, we should have a new president.
By the end of tomorrow, Zimbabwe will have a new president.
Definitely, by the end of the day tomorrow, Zimbabwe will have a new president, and that is in terms of the constitution.
Right. Comrade Maredza, one would ask the president, making this decision, did he do it on his own free will, or was he forced?
I think for me to fully answer this, I have to give a kind of a message to Comrade Mnangagwa, General Chiwenga, General Sibusiso Moyo, Maya Mujuru, Vatrangirai, na Baba Dumiso Davengwa. When the war was being waged, there was always this thing about Mbuya Neanda, tipewo nyika yedu yakatorwa ni vanhu. The war cry was based on Sekuru Kaguyi, Mbuya Neanda, Chaminuka, and so on. And they delivered. But immediately after the country was delivered, nobody went back to the same Mbuya Neanda, to the same Sekuru Kaguyi, to the same Chaminuka, to thank them for bringing the country back to its rightful owners. What I'm therefore saying to the powers that be is that there is a spiritual gap that actually needs to be filled. And connected to this, as we were driving over here, my son Malik, who was driving me, in typical millennial language, said to me, "This is low-key sad." And I said, "What do you mean by low-key sad?" Now, when you hear a 21-year-old saying those words in their language, in their millennial language, what that simply means is that he has observed that he is a man who the whole world was respecting. But at the same time, this man is gone, hoisted by his own petard. That's why it's low-key sad. Therefore, looking at, was it a forced decision?
Yes.
It is partly forced, it is partly, it had to happen.
Elaborate on that.
Yeah, because the man saw this coming for a very, very long time. But there was continuation of what I could call the commercialization and commodification of politics in Zimbabwe, where in order for anything to happen, you had to be like tied to some politician. There was no longer free space for people like the lawyer here to express his legal mind freely. I am an accountant to express my financial knowledge freely to the world. I had to be linked to some kind of politician in order for anything to happen. Now, once things begin, it has got to go wrong somewhere. And something had to give. And this is what has happened.
So, in short, you're saying he did this willingly?
As a matter of, he had no choice.
He had no choice.
He had no choice. He looked at whatever possibilities were around him, but there were no possibilities. The man was really cornered. This is why I go back to Malik's statement. Low-key sad.
Low-key sad, as Malik said. But Advocate Mpofu, in terms of the constitutionality of this happening, was this constitutional? Has this been done in a constitutional manner in terms of the events leading to the resignation, as well as the resignation itself?
Most definitely. But let me deal with the question that you asked, Comrade Mariza, first. Mr. Mugabe was forced out, but forced out by his own actions. Forced out by his own omissions, forced out by his failure to uphold the Constitution, forced out by his decision to allow his wife to capture him. That is what forced him out. He was forced out by his own misdeeds. But then at the end of the day, he had to do the proper thing in terms of the Constitution. Mr. Mugabe has left office as a result of a resignation. A resignation is provided for under Section 96 of the Constitution.
Can I just add on to what the advocate is saying?
I think you can do that when he finishes his statement, respectively, Comrade. You were saying?
So he's resigned office in terms of Section 96 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So he is left in a constitutionally valid, in a constitutionally acceptable way. But what happened? He searched his own conscience. He looked at the situation that was unfolding, and he came to the inevitable conclusion that had caused that situation. So the Constitution contemplates that a person can find themselves in the position that Mr. Mugabe found himself in today, where the person searches their own conscience and they decide that the only viable, the only honorable, the only dignified to take is to resign.
Comrade Mareza,
right. I wanted to add on to what Advocate Mupofu is saying, and I want the population of Zimbabwe to take a share of responsibility for what the president had become. We basically formed this monster on our own. The deification of a human being. He had basically become a god. And I think those that are going to take over from now onwards should avoid that situation, where things like what has been discussed today at Parliament, which was the one center of power concept, those kinds of things are dangerous. We have seen it for ourselves because of this example, and as Zimbabweans, we must actually avoid that from here onwards. Henceforth, we must not create a monster which we cannot control afterwards. And I want Zimbabweans to understand that they were actually partly to blame for this situation we find ourselves in.
How?
And therefore,
the question would be how were they?
By deification, or by making a god out of the man. While the one center of power was created, we encouraged that by actually having this praise thing about the man. And he became too large for the situation. But we encourage that. What we're saying is we've seen that mistake, and we shouldn't repeat it going forward.
Advocate, what are the constitutional and the legal frameworks available in terms of making sure that the country has a head of state tomorrow?
Now, in terms of the Constitution, and now we're talking about paragraph 14 of the 6th schedule for the Constitution. ZANU-PF, being the political party that sponsored President Mugabe into office, must, in terms of that provision, now nominate someone to replace him. Once ZANU-PF does so, it must communicate that decision to the Speaker of Parliament.
Advocate, before you continue, you talk about someone. Are we talking about any individual can be nominated?
Yes, definitely.
It doesn't have to be a member of cabinet. It doesn't have to be a member of parliament.
It doesn't have to be. But we know this is a public secret. We know that the person who's going to be nominated is Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. That is in terms of the Constitution. The Constitution does not limit the options to people who are part of cabinet. So once the ruling party nominates a replacement, the Speaker of Parliament must then ensure that the replacement takes his oath of office. So that is the next constitutional, that is the next legal step to be taken. Now, the swearing-in ceremony must be conducted by the Chief Justice or the most senior judge available. So what I foresee happening is that tomorrow Parliament is going to be advised by ZANU-PF that in terms of the Constitution, Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa has been nominated to replace Robert Mugabe. And once that happens, in terms of Section 94 of the Constitution, there must be a swearing-in ceremony. And once Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa is sworn in, he becomes the president of Zimbabwe and is going to remain in office up until the next general election.
Comrade Mareza, in terms of what we've just said, the legal expert here talk about the fact that this is constitutional, and the fact that all legal frameworks will be exhausted tomorrow to make sure that Zimbabwe has a head of state by end of day tomorrow. In terms of the general sentiment of who this person is, the legal expert here has said that it's general knowledge that it will be the former vice president of the nation. Your sentiment is in terms of who takes over and what needs to be done.
I think that's pretty obvious. I think it has been obvious for quite a long time. Even if we look at the build-up in these political rallies that were taking place, the youth rallies that were taking place, the one thing that was surprising in these rallies all the time was the reception that Mnangagwa got. And if you remember when he was sworn in as a vice president, the roof almost came down from where this was announced. That sentiment has always been there. Kuti vamunangagwa chikara, mtupese usavi, vanava kwa chivi, would actually be the president. So that sentiment has been there. It's going to be confirmed, and everybody's looking forward to that.
The sentiments from certain corners that, look, the vice president, who's still vice president, was the last thing that we heard was he was not fired by the president, Comrade Pelegeza Lampoko. What happens to him? Isn't he supposed to be the one who's on the vice president?
No, so what happens in terms of the constitution is that once the president resigns, this is done. The vice president available in this case, I won't look at the permutations because there's only one vice president. Pelegeza Lampoko assumes an acting role as the acting president. He's going to enjoy this unwanted distinction of having served as an acting president maybe for a day or less.
Yeah.
But that is inevitable. That is going to happen. So he is a stopgap measure, so to speak, in terms of the constitution. But once the ruling party nominates a replacement, that nominee then assumes office, and Vice President Mpogo will then have to revert to his position as the vice president.
Yeah.
That is, if president is pleased to have him as the vice president.
What is the role of the Speaker of Parliament in all of this? Because there has been assertions that he is the one who has assumed the role of president. Is that true or not?
No, that's not true. That is not constitutional. That has not happened, and that is not going to happen. That is not in terms of the constitution. Unless ZANU-PF, in terms of paragraph 14 of the 6th schedule that I've been talking about, decides to nominate Advocate Jacob Mdenda as the president. But the talk that is going around about the speaker assuming the role of the president is heretical. That is not constitutional.
Now, Comrade Mareza, in terms of the government, are we going to see a transitional government?
Well, it depends on what they decide, really. But one would think that since we are going towards elections, they want to think about make a decision, a wise decision of whether they have a transitional period or they do not have. One would think that looking at the way the economy is, maybe it would be advisable to have a transitional period where the economy is set up properly again, to work again, after which we can talk about elections. Because the way things are right now with unemployment hovering around 90%, cash shortages, you can see the situation that we have right now, that it is actually not possible to go forward without a transitional arrangement. And from the sentiments that have been going around, it would appear that the thinking is that the transitional arrangement would be all-inclusive, where all the other parties are involved, which would really be good for the country, because this would unite everybody. This would set the tone to put the economy right again with the inclusivity of everybody's contribution, and that's what we want to see.
So if I may just come in on the transitional arrangement, there is a legal framework in place which allows that to happen. When the new president assumes office, he is not obliged to maintain the old cabinet. He can bring in new guys. So there is a legal framework that allows. As to whether that will be done, that is going to be a political decision. It is not going to be a legal decision.
How does this government operations, how does this affect the normal government ministries as well as cabinet ministers as well?
Well, once the new president assumes office, he does so with the full powers of a president. He is therefore able to relieve ministers of their positions, is able to hire new ministers. The only kind of president who cannot do so is an acting president in terms of section 100, or is it 1001? That is when the incumbent is still in place, and an acting president is chosen, that acting president has limited powers. But the situation is different when the incumbent has resigned, with the result that a whole new president is appointed. He is at large to appoint whoever he would to form part of his cabinet. And one would frankly look at the possibility of that happening maybe by the end of the week or sometime next week.
Now, Comrade Maredza, in terms of what then happens, look, you want to take a look in terms of what has been going around.
Yeah.
And some of those things were a possibility of a GNU, a possibility of a government of national unity where you get members of opposition getting into government. Are we going to see this or something that is totally not on the table?
Yeah, of course, this totally entirely depends, like the advocate said, on the president who is in charge. He has the right to appoint his own cabinet, and we cannot really say what he's going to do because that's his own prerogative. But from a layman's point of view, from a citizen's point of view, I think it's high time we actually saw much more of unity working, especially in this transitional period where we are coming from a situation of economic meltdown. Going forward, I think one would want to see a united Zimbabwe, and united across the political divide, united across the gender divide, united across the color, creed, race divide. All people would get together. If you saw what was happening on Saturday when the people demonstrated peacefully, it was really amazing. Somebody actually remarked that they didn't realize that there were still so many white people in Zimbabwe. That shows you the amount of unity that people want. Therefore, going forward, one would be looking at that kind of unity to be recognized in whatever arrangement is going to be made so that this country moves forward again. Yeah.
And in legally, coming back to you, Advocate Thabani Mpofu, in terms of what we have seen today, the resignation coming through and going into tomorrow, what's the first thing that we're going to see? Are we going to see a formal announcement by the Speaker of Parliament, or all the legalities have been done and it's just a matter of Parliament now sitting in to elect a new person?
We don't need a formal announcement. There was a session of Parliament today. The Speaker of Parliament made a public announcement. It has already been beamed across the country. That is sufficient. But it may happen that for reasons of ceremony, I say fanfare, the Speaker may also want to conduct another ceremony where he announces. But in terms of the law, as of now, President Mugabe is now history. We now refer to him as the former president.
Comrade Maredza, in terms of elections, we know that Zimbabwe is going for elections, or are we still going for elections, the general elections that we're expecting next year, where we're going to be choosing our president as well as members of parliament as well as council as well. Is this still on?
Let's say the legal position is that that is still on, and there's actually nothing that stops that from happening. But as we've talked about a possible transitional period, perhaps the political parties may agree that instead of having elections in August, they actually postpone them to some other opportune time when they've put the economy together. So that is possible. We can still have elections next year in August. That's still legal. That's still on course. ZEC is still working on that. But looking at the possibilities that will happen now that we have gone into this new era without Comrade Robert Mugabe, they may then decide that we have a transitional arrangement that will put the economy right, that will put Zimbabwe right. Thereafter, we can think about elections.
Advocate, wouldn't the opposition have problems with that in terms of, look, Zimbabwe is going for an election, and they would have obviously wanted to have participating in those elections, and it was just a matter of time, but it was next year, and we know it was early next year or mid-year also. Would they not take up an issue?
Well, one does not know how they're going to react, but one would assume that their reaction is going to be based on how inclusive the arrangement that the new president puts in place. But I want
But does he have a mandate in terms of deferring elections from the time that we had said they could have been held?
Yes, everything is legally possible. There are legal avenues that can be exploited in the election next year. So at that stage, it ceases to be about the law because the law allows it. It then becomes about the politics. If the politicians have an understanding and they come to the legal brains, who always find an avenue for that.
Do you expect the opposition to put up a fight in terms of, obviously they would want to be involved within this new government?
Well, it depends with how inclusive the new government of Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa is going to be. So that really is not a legal. It's not a legal issue.
It's
the politicians.
I'm sure, Comrade.
I think I just want to comment on what Advocate Mpofu is saying, and put a cautionary statement on the need for inclusivity. I think what has caused all this is because of exclusivity. People were excluding each other from the eating trough. People were excluding each other from the bread table. And if we continue doing that, we are actually repeating the very same thing that has caused somebody to resign today. Therefore, the caution is, let's be inclusive. Let's move this forward together. Let's move the country forward together. Let's build this economy together. And spirit of inclusivity together. Because once you have included everybody anyway, you may not even have an opposition. So why do you want to go the route of excluding this one and that one and so on, when you can put everybody together and you get rid of the opposition and the country moves forward? So as a word of caution, I think it is advised and advisable to go inclusive.
Very much so. Going back in terms of the statesman, end of an era for President Mugabe, who was, we have been reliably informed by Advocate Tabani there, that is the former president of Zimbabwe, is from now. In terms of his welfare from now onwards, what are we talking about here?
I think the man has voluntarily resigned. There are certain tenets of the law, which I'm quite sure the advocate here can elaborate further, of what happens to former presidents. There is provision within our constitution on how former presidents are looked after. I'm quite sure Advocate Mpofu can elaborate on that.
Yes, the constitution makes it clear that it's going to get certain benefits and all that issue is provided for in the constitution. But when you look at welfare in a broad, what's going to happen to him as a person? Is he going to be prosecuted, for instance? I'll take the position that prosecuting a 93-year-old is not jurisprudence. That's vengeance. That is no place in a civilized society. Anyone is thinking about that, we must rage against the dying of the light. That shouldn't be accepted. But those around the president, for instance, they can always be prosecuted. There's no doubt about that. I also explain that a sitting president enjoys immunity from criminal and civil suits during the period of their incumbency. But once that incumbency is lifted, the president, that person can then be prosecuted. The immunity evaporates. So in principle, in theory, rather, it is possible to prosecute someone for a crime that was committed 37 years ago. But in this instance, I think we must have respect for the elderly.
And then, what do we learn from him as an elder statesman? What do we learn from the 37 years that he's been president, and also the time that he spent even before pre-independence?
I think from my point of view, the major lesson that we draw from this is constitutionality. We must stick to the moment we start deifying somebody, we end up in a situation where politics is commodified and commercialized. And the moment we do that, that's when we start making factions, tribalism, nepotism, regionalism, and all the other evil isms there are. Therefore, what we pick from this is never ever commodify or commercialize politics. Never ever rule from the point of view of the ego, the personality cult. Rule from the Constitution, because then you are guided by the Constitution and not because the cult figure has become too big for the nation. That is the point, the lesson we learn from that.
I'll allow you a few seconds because we're almost coming.
I would say what we learn is that when you get tired.
When you get tired, rest. End of an era. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we have our political analyst Elton Ziki and economist Dr. Gomo in the second segment. So stay tuned.
Zimbabwe will never be a colony again.
It is all about your lifestyle, what you like to wear, and how you like to wear it. I really wanted to start off the show by counting down into December. But I just realized that, nah, it's too early for that. We are focusing on designers, two ladies that teamed up to create Yamwe.
Yamwe is a clothing brand we started this year. Just means
one.
So we just want to bring everybody together through clothing, I guess.
They say the best revenge is looking good and having a best hairdo. Be it it's a weave, be it you're rocking a shortcut, or perhaps natural hair. And right here on What a Lifestyle, we are all about embracing what you like.